Call the December meeting of the Community Development, Housing, and General Government Committee meeting to order. It's the first meeting of December. It is the first meeting with both new members of the committee, Councilmember Clark and myself as chair, and Councilmember Denise Adams as vice chair, and Councilmember Dan Bessie as member of the committee. I have a big seat to fill from our former councilwoman who is here with us today, Councilwoman Molly Light, former chair of this committee, and so it's always indeed an honor to be in her presence. Before we get to the general agenda and consent items listed here on the agenda, again, do want to take the opportunity as incoming chair of the committee to say again thank you to staff and the hard work that they do each and every day to work on behalf of the citizens of the city of Winston-Salem, and look forward to the opportunity to continue to engage with him in the role and chairmanship of this committee and the other colleagues. As is the tradition of the committee, we'll look at both the consent items and then the general agenda items. There's one item on consent agenda.
I move for approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
Been moved and properly second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, likewise. We will move to the general agenda. We do have, if you'll look at your revised agenda at your place, there is an additional item that was added, the item in reference to the Chatham Mills, which information was sent out to council in reference to, and then the item be able to move that forward as they look to close that project before the end of the year. All right, G1.
Item G1, consideration of items authorizing the City of Winston-Salem to provide financial assistance to the Housing Authority of Winston-Salem for the acquisition, demolition, and rehabilitation of New Hope Manor apartments. Item continued from the November 14, 2016 committee meeting.
All right. Mr. Brooks.
Good afternoon, Chairman Montgomery, members of the committee.
Good afternoon.
This item is an item requesting authorization for the city to provide financial assistance to the Housing Authority of Winston-Salem for the acquisition, demolition, and rehab of the New Hope Manor apartments. The apartment complex is located off of Cleveland Avenue in the East Winston part of the city, and we have heard many times about the conditions at the complex and how deplorable they are. And this proposal is an attempt to address some of those issues. The original request was for $1.7 million, which included $1 million for acquisition. But at the request of council, Halls met with the lender who agreed to reduce the acquisition cost from 1.9 to 1.8. Also, as reported to the mayor, and city council, staff did confirm the scope of work and the cost estimates were within reason and, if completed satisfactorily, would bring the property up to the city's minimum housing code standard and federal housing quality standards, and in some instances may even exceed it. So Halls believes the $1.6 million in assistance will permit it to acquire, demolish, abate, rehab, and operate the property. And in order to achieve that, staff has recommended approval of the following financing, which would be acquisition. The city would be $900,000, bank $900,000, demolition, the city $200,000, bank $0, rehab repair $500,000, the bank $520,000, for a total of $1.6 for the city and $1.4 for the bank. In the proposal for the CARF here, Halls has agreed to make a payment in lieu of the pilot annually, starting in the 4th year after completion if the property is not taxable, which is equal to the actual or estimated city property tax, but not to exceed $15,000. And staff recommends financing terms as follows. Funds for the demolition and rehab repair will be deferred loan for 20 years and then amortizing loan for 20 years at 0% interest. And during the 20-year deferral period, the loan would be credited the amount of the payment in lieu of taxes plus the value of the rent for a city unit, which Halls has agreed to provide for emergency relocation purposes. After 20 years, the balance of the loan would amortize for 20 years. Funds for acquisition will be deferred loan at 0% interest that is due on sale or transfer of the property. So the proposed fund source is $1.6 million of 2014 general obligation bonds for housing development, and an appropriate resolution is attached. We do have to share with the committee that there was a request made by Councilmember Montgomery that we talk with Hawes about the forgiveness piece, and staff failed to do that. We did not talk with them about that piece. And in doing so, the proposal or the suggestion, they did not have an opportunity to consider until just recently. Mr. Raleigh will make some comments regarding just the overall financing structure and what led up to that whole piece of financing as we had it.
Good afternoon, Chairman Montgomery, members of the committee. Just to review briefly the financing structure as it was originally proposed, $900,000 of the $1.6 million in total assistance was to be offered in the form of a deferred loan only to be due upon the sale or transfer of the property. $500,000 was going to be issued in the form of a loan, deferred for 20 years and then amortizing for a 20-year period after that time. And then $200,000 was going to be also a loan, which was going to be amortizing over the 20-year period as well. That money was going to be used for demolition. So the outstanding debt for the property for the project would be $1.6 million, and those were the original terms that were discussed. Certainly was my failure, I think, in communicating. There was a subsequent request that came in that was not communicated. However, we have communicated that request for reconsideration on the structure of that financing, which Hawes has presented with, and understanding that those terms have not been accepted. So certainly our apologies and my personal apologies for not relaying that in a timely fashion. The proposal, I think, that we had on the table originally counted the payment in lieu of taxes for $15,000 to be applied towards the $500,000 or $700,000 of debt that would be amortizing after the 20-year period. We would also be receiving a unit to be used for relocation of displaced residents. So essentially, the outstanding debt at the end of that 20-year period would be the 1.6 less the amount of pilots that would have been credited against that. So that's the proposal that's before you now. We have offered some other suggestions in lieu of some conversations with council, and again, we have not reached agreement on any terms other than those that have been proposed in front of you today. So I'm happy to answer any questions related to that.
Are there any questions of staff?
I want to make a comment about what we did at finance yesterday. You want me to wait till they finish?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Bessie?
Thank you. Just clarification, the proposal that is before the committee is the same proposal that was contained in the package.
That's correct.
Thank you.
That is correct.
All right, seeing no questions of staff, on yesterday, Finance Committee moved forward the proposal as it was stated in the packet in terms of what came to council. Are there any questions?
Can I make a few
Mr.
more
Clark?
comments?
Yeah.
And by the way, 3 of the 4 finance committee folks are here, so they did vote on it. The key thing was the pilot payments. What we learned yesterday between the 200, the 500, and the 900,000, that if the property was sold in 2 or 3 years, we would get all that money back, with the exception of the pilot money. When it was paid, it would, and of course we're getting a check, it would be used to reduce one of the loans, and that was about $10,000 a year. So the way it was arranged was we would get all our money back if it was sold 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Now, if it was never sold, it would be 20 years or so before some of these things would start amortizing. Now, it is the general opinion of those in the room that something's going to happen here sooner than 20 years. Mr. Chairman, I would suggest, it seems like to me where we are is the issue of the pilot money more than anything. We did consider yesterday the Housing Authority would not pay the pilot, and therefore the loan would not be reduced. I suggest we ought to keep it in because at least we get $10,000 a year back of our money. And I also reminded the folks that, for what it's worth from a historical precedent, the pilot money we do receive from the other Housing Authority properties, we do return back to the Housing Authority. That is used in a couple areas. One I know is specifically a scholarship that we give out to students coming out of the Housing Authority for college, I believe, and some other areas. So it is not without precedent that we return the money. Now, I will say I have always had concerns about that because I feel like the apartments that the Housing Authority owns generate demands on the city services, and I have no trouble using those pilot monies to pay for police, fire, road maintenance, or whatever. But that seems to be the sticking point. And of course, there's 100 different ways you can slice that elsewise, but that's what what the Finance Committee did yesterday.
Any other questions?
Just a comment.
Ms. Adams?
Again, I agree with Councilmember Clark. Over the years, I remember when we started to let the Housing Authority have the payment in lieu of taxes to use for different programs that benefited the residents of public housing. I was on the Housing Authority board at that time, and Mr. Art Milligan was the executive director. Years have come and gone. I don't know, again, what we do with that money now, but again, I just have to emphasize that the city, as time goes by, we're being asked to do a lot. And everybody seems to keep forgetting that eventually we need tax dollars or money to do what we do. And again, we can kick this can down the road like we're doing some other things without thinking about, okay, we're taking care of things now, but what about 5 years from now, 3 years from now, if HUD dissolves and things like that? Because it's not, we can't say that that's not a possibility. I believe that when we go forward again, that anybody that gets any kind of loan, deferred, grant, whatever, I believe that they should be putting some stake in the game as we move forward. I just believe that.
Mr. Bessie?
Either a general comment or a comment with a, as an inquiry. It seems that the plan proposed here anticipates the Cleveland Avenue homes redevelopment, but that is not a certainty. And given prospective budgetary priority changes at the national level over the next few years, I think it's even less of a certainty now than it was before. Yeah. My working assumption is that the argument for acquisition and partial demolition, and partial renovation of these properties is stronger even in the event that the Cleveland Homes renovation project is not funded in the near or midterms. But if staff have any comment in response to that, or colleagues on the committee have any observations in response to that, I'd like to hear them.
Staff, any?
I'll be glad to comment. Yeah, I think that it is the conditions there, and everybody agrees, are deplorable. Not to steal that word from some previous comments, but the conditions are very difficult for people who live there. Law enforcement is out there almost every night. We've had multiple shootings from or because of that location. It's something needs to be done, and the struggle, as I've said before, is we have a limited amount of funds. So ideally, it'd be better to sort of relocate all of the residents and tear it down. But that's twice or 3 times as much money. So Yeah, I think probably this is the best option. The details of the pilot need to be worked out, but this is the best option to do something as opposed to letting it stand. And I think you're right. It could be. I wouldn't want to bet any money on what Washington's going to do.
Ms. Adams?
One more comment and question, Mr. Garrity and staff. I think yesterday I asked for, and I guess between now and Monday we'll get it, I need to see the projects that we have supported and assisted with HAWS for the past 10 years, and what were the, again, funding mechanisms that were used. I also have to ask or put out there, again, there are other communities in the city that are just like Hope Manor. You know, I mean, my thing is, again, if we're going to do this for one, and this is what we do, we do this, and then we do this, and we do this. You know, my thing is, and maybe we talk about this at this strategic planning session, how do we decide strategically, again, like what we had to do a few years ago with the parity of 8 wards, if we do a bond, we split it 8 ways. How do we decide, again, which development or community has the greatest need? There is poverty all over the inner core. And like I said before, I am quite certain that there are other council members besides Councilmember Montgomery and Councilmember Burke and Councilmember Taylor, as well as myself, that we have neighborhoods that we would love to do this to, which would change the whole dynamics. Mm-hmm. If I could fix Cherish Plaza and Lincoln, all of the work and money we're putting into Habitat and all of those other developments, the Hope 6, it would be almost like a perfect neighborhood. But my thing is, what is the plan when we go in to do this, that we looking long range versus right now? And I understand, as you said, that there are people in need, but Cleveland is not the only place that is in need. We need, as a council, to strategically, I know we got on here some scope of work, another consultant, another whatever plan on housing and whatever, but we need to look at how we do this now strategically versus no plan, just pick and decide right now they need, squeaky wheel gets the oil, let's go. Because if we don't look at this, at the strategic process in next month, then we need to schedule another one just to talk about it, because we can't keep doing this the way we're doing it. This is not how you operate a business.
All right. Mr. McIntosh?
I'm looking at this like a real estate deal. We got a stream of income. We got a present value. Is the rationale or is the hang-up on Hawes' part a cash flow issue? Is it a carrying cost issue? Because if that's the case, then we have an opportunity to go back to the seller, to the lien holder, who really wants out of this deal bad, and ask them to reduce this purchase price by the same amount that works out to that $1,250 a month. $15,000 a year divided by 12 months is $1,250 a month. That, back that out of the market interest rate, and you come up with the present value.
If I could speak to that for just a moment, Chairman, and Commissioner McIntosh, to your inquiry. If you look at the pro forma, regardless as to whether the forgiveness clause on that $700,000 is enacted after 20 years or not, because the debt is not being serviced, it does not affect the cash flow of the project in the 20-year period that we're looking at. Essentially, it remains the same. So forgiveness clause included or not, the pro forma for the first 20 doesn't change.
I have a couple comments and a question. One is in reference to the questions that were raised on yesterday in reference to the clause of the forgiveness and the consideration of Hawes to look at the ability to change the actual terms of the loan from being forgivable with $15,000 being credited towards the reduction and allowing that to be a 20-year deferred loan that will be paid based upon the same terms that will amortize after 20 years, still making the pilot payment. My suggestion was never that Halls would not make the pilot payment, that they would continue to make the pilot payment, but it would not count towards the credit. And again, just maybe a shaking of the head, that was not amenable to Halls, correct?
That's correct.
And I'm looking for one of the Halls folks to also, that's correct, that's not amenable Halls. They also went back to them today in terms of attempting to do that. Could you explain exactly the language that you suggested them today and asked?
Certainly. What we had discussed earlier this afternoon was a possibility that we could insert some language in the agreement which would essentially call for whatever party at the time at which Hawes transferred, if they transferred the property or sold the property to another entity, that we would have to come back to City Council to negotiate the terms. For instance, if the committee and council elected to make everything a loan with no forgiveness clause, that would be the agreement today, subject to, 10 years down the road when another entity entered the equation and sought to acquire the property, that they would have to come back. So council would be essentially given the opportunity to decide whether to forgive a portion, all, none, that it could be determined at a later date what forgiveness may or may not happen on those loans. So
And
flexibility in the terms was what we were.
right. And to my colleagues, the reason for any of the inquiry on both sides, one, for the forgiveness piece of it has been looking at what comes back to the city in terms of coffers, but also the long-term piece of where the city plays a role in future development. If we do the forgiveness up front, we have absolutely really no say in real leverage outside of the loan if it's paid in full, whether or not we support anything. And with changing demands and needs within the city, we have the potential to receive all of our money back potentially, or we can negotiate, or whatever council sits at this table at that time can negotiate potential forgiveness of a loan at that time. But if we do it up front, we automatically forfeit a certain percentage already going into it. And that is a consideration looking at the long-term pieces where we are receiving money up front. Doesn't change the dynamics of the deal for Halls. They're not having to put out additional dollars up front. It's not an additional encumbrance on Halls to have to pay additional money, but it simply makes those simple changes within that process. And that's the reason for those questions that were brought up, and the consideration and thought from the committee on the items would be greatly appreciated. Mr. Clark, I think you...
Yeah, a couple comments. First off, and I think, Mr. Garrity, it may have just been in your email to us that I think we're looking to do a study of housing in the area. You're going to come to us soon with a proposal to hire a consulting group to give us a...
That's actually an item on the agenda today.
It is? Okay, well, I'm ahead of myself there. But anyway, which I think is a good idea. And I think what we're going to learn when we study housing in Winston-Salem, as Ms. Adams just mentioned, is that we got a lot of places that need help. Probably more so than we have anywhere near enough money to work with. Having said that, how do you do something that you don't have enough money to do in? And just give one example, we just did the Rolling Hills where there's actually a private developer coming in. What the city did was allow them to go out and sell revenue bonds on the project. No obligation to us, but we were able to work with them and do something there. What I do like about this one is we're able to bring these up to the standard, acceptable standard of our codes at about, I think, 15,000 a unit, Mr. Wood, something like that. And I think what we're going to find, as opposed to Rolling Hills are going to spend, I think, 50,000, then they're going to do a lot more work. But I think we're going to find from this study is that we can't afford to do 50,000 a unit if we need hundreds and hundreds of things redone. We're going to have to do it economically. I'm just wondering if we're only talking about, one more comment before I make my suggestion. I am delightfully puzzled that the council is finally concerned about how much money we forgive. The next item on here is the Patterson Avenue, where that gentleman has gotten, I think, $900,000 if we approve what's there worth of city loans, and I'm guessing a fair amount of that's forgivable. I know the other RUCA, the infamous restaurant out on Auburn Station, has got several $100,000 of forgivable loans. So it's something we regularly do, basically because these projects economically will not float a full repayment. I mean, that's just the reality of it. But I welcome the council's concern there, and will be very curious if that concern continues to other projects that have large forgivable amounts in them. But having said all that, we're only talking about 10,000 a year. Is there not some compromise we can make and move this forward? For example, half. They pay 10, half applies to the loan forgiving. If it's 2 to 3 years from now, and Mr. Bessie did make a good point, we don't know if this what's going to happen in the world, but if a project comes down, we're only talking 2 or 3 years. You're not talking about a lot of money on a $1.6 million balance. And if it doesn't, in 20 years, they're going to start making payments on pretty much most of it. So I'm just wondering if there isn't some compromise in here so we can move this thing forward. But I just offer that as a suggestion.
I'm open. Halls hadn't necessarily been open to anything we've offered thus far.
Well, should I mean, I could make a motion in a minute that says that, they pay 10, 5 gets applied to the loan balance, and 5 gets into the general coffers. That's not a huge amount, and I will, not to brag, but someone on finance did push the bank, and they did go down $100,000. So thank Mr. Trump for that. But that is $100,000 less that they were intending to borrow. So there has been some positive benefits there. So
Is that a motion?
I would make that as a motion if the chairman's comfortable with me making a motion at this point. I would make a motion that we accept the proposal as presented in the finance number G2, with the exception of the $10,000 payment, half of which, the pilot payment, half of which would go to reduce the loan, and the other half would go into the city's general fund.
Second.
I'm finished.
Okay. With that, the only other thing I would ask in reference to that in terms of when the language of whatever goes into the final resolution is to ensure, one, that language is very clearly stated, but then also the commitments and comments that have been stated both in Finance Committee in reference to total payment being received back to the city if they get the Choice Neighborhood Grant, because that has been consistently stated in terms of the Finance Committee meetings. Is that the understanding of?
I'm not sure what you just said.
I think we need,
Does the forgiveness part reduce the outstanding liability? Right?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. The half of it, would say 5,000, would apply against the 700,000 for a loan, as opposed to 10,000. I'm cutting the baby in half here.
I think that the question, as I understand it, Chairman, was would Hawes agree if they got the Choice Neighborhood Grant or some version of that to pay us the full amount, including them, and not discount the $5,000 or whatever.
That was a question, and if not, then we can go ahead and move forward. But that was a question because that's
Right.
what had been said in terms of.
And what I understood from Mr. Woods talking to him this morning was no, they would only pay back the amount minus any amount that had been forgiven as part of the pilot.
Well,
Is that correct?
Well,
okay.
I made a motion. It was seconded. I like to keep it where it is. I think it's a nice compromise.
All right, that's been moved. Properly second. Any additional questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? One abstaining. That's 3 in favor. None opposed. 1 abstaining.
It'll be on the general agenda Monday night.
All right.
And since there are 2 different motions coming out of 2 different committees, you'll probably need to state the difference. It's fairly small.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
We don't have a reconciliation committee.
No, not now.
Yeah, right.
All right. Item G2.
Item G2, resolution approving the allocation of additional revitalizing urban commercial areas 3, matching funds for the Patterson Glen area.
All right. Is this Mr. Page, Mr. Brooks, Mr. Riley?
Back up. Yes. Good afternoon again. So this item is a request for funding, additional funding for the RUCA project located at 1800 North Patterson Avenue in the amount of $53,600. And I do, at the request, I think at Finance Committee yesterday, have some additional information to provide to this committee. And if you'll allow me an opportunity, I'd like to pass this to you while we discuss it.
Got one more?
Mr. McIntosh is not sharing. Was he supposed to share one of those?
Oh, yes. He is.
You're going to read both of them at the same time.
That's the way I am.
Wait.
There, here, give him one.
Be nice, and I'll share this with you.
Okay. I just want to be sure our chairman. Here, I need one. No.
What?
Does everyone have one? I'll leave that at the mayor's.
No, this is before. Is there two different packets? Okay.
There are two different packets of pictures.
Yeah, it was passing as a package.
Okay.
We'll show them.
One's got the outside of the building, one's got the inside, is the first page. Okay.
Yes.
I need a before.
You should have given us some directions when you
Oh, I apologize. It was passing a packet. I thought you grabbed it. So what you're seeing there, in addition to a very quick overview of the project, are slides, and I apologize, we couldn't get these in your pack due to the timing of the request. But one pack has pictures of the property as it looked prior to the start of the project. The second package has pictures of the project, and these were taken today. So there was some conversation about what this particular project looked like, how it was evolving. So as you flip through, you can see the transformation that's taken place to date. And I can also, Chairman, and please let me know if you'd like me to walk through what the other piece of information, the spreadsheet that's colored, contains a very quick overview, if you will, of the scope of the project. And what we have tried to do is break down all of the items on the scope, the fate and the amounts for each line item on the scope. And you can see we've got total for phase 1, 2, and 3 of the project. What those represent are the periods in which additional funding was injected to the project. So this has been a phased project. The first phase, you see, totals $475,000 of RUCA assistance. The second phase, which included the front parking, the rear driveway access, was a total of $202,000 in RUCA assistance. The third phase, which was approved administratively, contains work on the front and back buildings, primarily for electrical work. The total RUCA assistance for the third request for assistance was $39,000. And on the bottom in the green is a request that's currently before you today, which totals $53,600 in RUCA assistance. And you can see the scopes of work for which that request will be going to support. So I'm happy to stop there and answer any questions you have about the information you have presented to you.
All right. Are there questions? Councilman Bessie?
An overview question. Why is the project coming to us in these pieces? Is this a planned phase request, or are we getting piecemeal, updated requests as they discover new problems?
Certainly. I will tell you that the first two phases of the project were planned as such, and it was originally envisioned that was essentially all that was going to be associated with this project. So the initial scope for the 475 and then the parking was always intended to be a second phase. Now the subsequent phases have been, I guess you could, as you characterized it, piecemeal. And I would characterize the nature of each of those requests as probably falling into one of three categories. The first being it was an item that was contained in the original scope of work that may not have been sufficiently funded, an item that was not included at all in the original scope of work and probably should have been or could have been, and the third would truly be unforeseen items. For instance, item number 42 in your spreadsheet probably could be characterized as an item that reasonably could not have been foreseen at the outset of the project. That is for grading, drainage, and concrete work. There is some leakage into the base of one of the sides of the building that's been created and as a result of improper grading on the side of the property, but only was discovered. There's also a drain that has been clogged in the back that serves the back of the property that probably is just, something that truly is unforeseen.
Ms. Clark, you weren't here yesterday at Finance. By the way, Dan, we just scored this at Finance yesterday, and it was 2 in favor, none opposed, and 2 abstaining. My questions yesterday are the same today. I would like for someone to tell me that what's in green here will in fact finish the project, because this is the 4th request. Secondly, as this work has been done, how do we steward such that that in fact these are the monies that have been spent, and then in fact we're paying for half of what's being spent?
Certainly. So we perform a site visit, staff performs a site visit to the project on a weekly basis. And for each item on the scope of work, invoices have to be submitted. Our construction staff reviews that particular request for funding to ensure that that the item has been performed to the degree that is being requested. For instance, if it's 50% of the electrical work is being requested, that we have 50% of the electrical that's been performed. And so that's how we monitor that the funds are going to things that have been included as a part of the scope of work.
Ms. Adams?
Yes. The tax value. What's the tax value of this property now? And what is it expected to be once this is completed? Because we need to start looking at things like that too. We're putting money, we're investing in a product, and if we're not going to get some type of payback or something, that's my main focus these next 4 years. Everybody just get ready. That's all. So what's the tax value, and what is the expected tax value once we finish?
We can get that information to you.
Thank you.
Mr. Bessie?
Has this been a 50% match throughout the project? 50%,
It has.
Coming from the city, 50% coming from the private?
That's
source?
correct. Yes.
Mr. McIntosh?
I went out for a site visit today along with Councilmember Larson, and I don't doubt the numbers that have gone into this. This thing was essentially a shell. The amount of steel that went into the roof, I mean, it's a massive undertaking, and I believe that this amount of money, or pretty close to that, has gone into this piece of property. I got a little bit of a problem with the general contractor fee, and not just in this case, but in cases where we're supplying funding to projects where the owner is the general contractor. I'd like to see those in the future be excluded. We've seen a couple other projects where those numbers have been significant. I don't think this one's way out of line, but it seems a little self-serving to be able to charge the city for, as an owner, to be the general contractor.
Ms. Adams?
Councilman Montgomery, Mr. Garrity, I thought that we said that we weren't going to do that. Maybe I got left.
I remember that.
I do too. I know we did, because it came to us with I think the Southeast project, and it was brought up that if we're giving money and unforgivable funds and matches, we shouldn't be paying for people to, and we had a couple of instances in Ruka where the owners were their own private contractors, and I had a problem with it then. I still have a problem with it.
Mr.
I
Brooks?
thought, Mr. Brooks, maybe I'm wrong.
I think what you may be referring to, Councilmember Adams, is where the owner was the coordinating neighborhood agent, where they actually marketed the program and then received a fee as a CNA in that area. And we did exclude that. If you were an owner, you could not profit by being a coordinating neighborhood agency or marketing it to yourself.
I think going forward, we need to look at that, Mr. Garrett.
Right.
Because I just think we need to look at and change that.
That discussion came up as part of Southeast Plaza because Mr. Asasi has a license company, but we didn't council didn't change the rules to prohibit that. In this project, we've had that same discussion with Mr. Amir. In fact, because of his, apparently he's not a licensed contractor, is he? So, and so in order to do it, or in order of inspections to allow him to do the work, he had to certify that he will be the only tenant for the first year. Inspections handled that. Correct.
My understanding, yes.
When does the
Clark,
clock start ticking on that? I got a couple more, on that first year, because I met one of his
Well,
new
well-
tenants today.
I would assume it begins when it gets CO or TCO.
Okay.
He's asked for a waiver repeatedly, and we've told him that we do not have that authority, as I
Not
understand.
allowed under state law, correct?
Okay. All right. Beyond that, the fact that there has been this much creep in the project really doesn't surprise me, given the scope of it. I think the takeaway there is that when we look at a project that's this big and involved, that we throw a much bigger oh my God factor on it next time. I mean, this is a 50%, 60% cost overrun, which again, doesn't surprise me, but it would have been nice if we had thought about this as a $900,000 project at the get-go instead of a $400,000 project on our share. So I would recommend that we adjust our sights a little bit higher. We are we'll have a first position lien on this. Do you
Yes.
trust? Well,
Yes.
the owner told me today that the balance of the equity in here is his. He does not have any debt to an outside lender. It makes me more comfortable. If he walks away from the project, then we get the entire project back. Not that I think that'll happen, but I sleep better at night knowing that we're in first position and not second position on a loan. Just comments.
Mr. Clark, just real quick, I'm assuming we've had the typical inspections as you go along, electrical, mechanical, all that stuff. Has everything gone okay?
Yes. He's passed each inspection thus far. I don't believe there have been any complications in that regard, no.
Mr. McIntyre?
I do believe he's fairly close to buttoning up. I mean, it looks like the vast majority. He's got drop ceilings to put in. He's got his electrical work to finish out. So I think the majority of the scope of the work has been done.
It has. It's about, it's probably 90% paid out and 90% complete, if not a little bit more.
Mr. Clark? My third and last comment. I didn't remember the fact, you just mentioned he wasn't a GC. I am now concerned that if he's got tenants lined up and they can't come in, is there any way he could appeal this to the state inspections board or anything like that?
It requires changing the state laws, I understand.
Okay.
And Mr. Amir knew that. We had many conversations, Mr. Page did with him, and inspections at the beginning of the project. He chose to do it this way because it was significantly cheaper, if I remember right, Mr. Page, for him not to have to pay. Correct?
Yes, at the start of the project, I believe there was a contractor's fee of approximately $75,000, $80,000 that he would save by doing the work himself and putting that money back into the project.
Thank you. That's all.
All right, Mr. Bessie?
To what degree is the viability of this project adversely impacted by his inability to include other tenants in the first year? And
I think
is this entire is the viability of this entire project contingent on receipt? No.
He doesn't owe anybody any money on the project.
And
He doesn't have any debt service on it.
And my understanding is that Mr. Amir understood that going in and has worked to line up tenants for the project. We don't have any details or specifics on that, but he has indicated that he has tenants to occupy some of the space.
Yes, but if he can't have tenants for the first year,
Oh, you're right. But I guess that's, yeah, he
is
doesn't
going
tend
to
to
have to
operate the business.
operate.
Yeah.
Okay, and let me clarify something.
Mr.
This tenant was
McIntyre?
not lined up to move in. I just met her. He introduced me. Her space is not done, so I'm not saying he's going to jump the gun on that, but we need to keep our eye on it. Also, he's conducting his own business out of there, so there's revenue coming in.
That's what
and
he's
that
the
is
owner of those
permissible.
businesses. That's correct.
Right.
Yeah, unless things have changed from the outset, I think his plan was to have one section sort of as an automotive section where he was doing some automotive work. The front part would be a convenience store. Then he has 2 or 3 offices on a second part and a large area in the back that he says will be marketed as some type of community center.
All right. Any other questions from committee? Is there a motion?
Well, I'll move approval if you get it forward. Although I'm going to abstain.
Same, second.
There's a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Those abstaining? That moves forward. 1 opposed, 3 abstaining. Well, 1 in favor, so that it's going in general agenda. The other will move forward with 2 in favor and 2 abstaining.
Being
2 of
chairman
which
can be
are
a very lonely position sometimes.
yeah.
Mr. Chairman, if I may ask council to give us confirming advice on the legality of paying a general contractor fee to someone who is not a licensed general contractor.
I'll be happy to take them to it and provide them.
Thank you.
All right. G3.
Item G3, ordinance revising Chapter B of the Unified Development Ordinances to amend regulations for accessory dwellings. Recommended by the Planning Board, item continued from November 10th, 2016 meeting of the Community Development Housing General Government Committee.
All right. Mr. Norby is going to give us a brief update to make sure everybody on committee is up to date on where we are, and then we can jump into what we have for today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, council members. Yeah, I want to kind of take you through, since this has had a long gestation period, I guess, take you through the whole how it got to the council, and then Kirk Erickson will take it from there and talk about the more recent discussions at the committee here. So, first of all, accessory dwellings are structures that can be attached to or detached from the principal residential structure on a lot. It's existed in the UDO since its adoption and in prior zoning ordinances since the 1930s, and they're common in other cities as well, not only here in the state but across the country. They can be found in older neighborhoods near downtown, as well as in the more outlying areas of the city and the county. And as we're working with this, just keep in mind we got to think about both the city and the county jurisdiction, which very different characteristics there. The staff previously discussed the need to amend the accessory unit regulations with the committee back in August of 2015. Our current UDO, just to kind of give you an idea of what's on the books now and has been for many years, limits the occupancy of accessory units to relatives, adopted persons, dependents, or servants of the property owner. And then also people over 55 and handicapped persons can occupy attached accessory units. And just as a reminder, detached accessory units require a Board of Adjustment special use permit. So those aren't allowed carte blanche. They're allowed only with notice and a public hearing and findings of fact by the Board of Adjustment. There was a recent North Carolina court decision in the Wilmington area that basically changed case law for the whole state there. Municipalities cannot limit the use of land based on the identity of the users or the owners of the property. The city attorney has had legal concerns about the enforceability of our current ordinance and has instructed the Board of Adjustment to disregard kinship and relationship requirements for upcoming special use permits for accessory dwellings, and advises that an amendment is necessary to protect our ordinance from legal challenge. In the 3 years since the city attorney gave that instruction to the Board of Adjustment, only 14 detached accessory units have been approved through the special use permit process. In researching where we go from here, given that case law, the staff looked at the 30 largest municipalities in the state, and interestingly enough, only 4 of the state's 30 largest municipalities prohibit accessory dwellings. All but those 4 allow them in single-family zoning. Legacy 2030, as you know, your long-range comprehensive plan adopted as the policy encourages looking at accessory dwellings as part of the total housing picture for the city. And there have been some other national publications that also note the potential benefits of accessory dwellings. A couple of them I'll point out is actually a paper that was put out by the White House not too long ago that talks about tools for creating more affordable housing opportunities there, and accessory dwellings are one of the toolbox elements there for cities to consider in doing that. Another one is this book that was put together called In-Laws, Outlaws, and Granny Flats, and it has a lot of really neat examples of variations of how accessory dwellings can be done in a way that makes it compatible with its surroundings and all that. So you see on the screen there the potential benefits. So that's why we were responding to the attorney's cautions by putting together an ordinance that hopefully could balance things. The staff early on held 2 public input meetings in September of last year to discuss possible ordinance changes and seek feedback. And we did get feedback from a number of neighborhood residents and also tiny home advocates. And they voiced either concern or interest related to the issues of setbacks, size limitations, design issues, and the impact of this ordinance on the tiny house movement. So what we put together was an initial proposal for a accessory dwelling ordinance. And I'm going to highlight these things in yellow as we go through these slides so that you can see how all these things as we've gone along have been added to the draft there. So it's a pretty substantial list of features that have gone into this ordinance as it's done. First of all, kinship requirements were eliminated. The Board of Adjustment special use permit was retained, and that still has all those things like notification, public hearings, and findings. Still required for detached units. Attached units would still be allowed by right with conditions that would have to be followed. Parking for the unit would have to be provided and served by the same driveway as the principal dwelling, unless the accessory unit is on a corner lot or alley where it could have its own driveway coming in. Detached units would have to be behind the front facade of the main dwelling. The accessory units would only be permitted with single-family residential uses. You couldn't kind of double load it in multifamily there. The detached units would have a maximum height of 24 feet. That's to accommodate garage apartments there. And there would be a 1,000 square foot size limit for accessory units. Also, setback requirements were proposed into that initial draft, which included minimum rear setbacks equal to 50% of the required rear setback of the principal structure in residential districts. The minimum side setbacks for accessory dwellings would be the same as those for the principal residence. And then accessory dwellings in non-residential districts would have minimum rear setbacks of 12.5 in the rear and side of 7. So after 3 months of revisions that were prompted by planning board discussion before the planning board went to a public hearing was held in February of this year. So there were additional requirements put into the public hearing version through that 3 months of discussion, including 1 parking space required per accessory unit bedroom. Detached units could only be on lots at least 9,000 square feet in size. The detached units would only be allowed on lots where the principal residence occupies no more than 30% of the total lot area. Detached units would have to be set back at least 20 feet from the principal residence on the lot. No more than 2 adults would be allowed to live in an accessory unit. And the maximum square footage out in Growth Management Area 3, which is the suburban neighborhoods, could go up to 1,500 feet if the lot is at least 1 acre in size, and the 1,000 square foot maximum remained in GMAs 1 and 2. That's downtown in the urban neighborhoods. So after hearing concerns from the citizens at the February public hearing, the board discussed it further, and there were some additional requirements proposed, such as all parking for accessory units would have to be off-street parking. Variances could not be granted by the Board of Adjustment for lots that are less than 9,000 square feet, and variances for existing structures not meeting dimensional or size requirements could only be granted for structures existing prior to the adoption of the proposed regulations. So all total, the resulting proposed ordinance with all of these things that you've seen in yellow that have been added to it is more restrictive than all of the larger municipalities except for the 4 that totally prohibit accessory dwellings. So pretty restrictive ordinance already. So after substantial discussion by the planning board and the desires expressed for further restrictions by some planning board members, there were several motions that were made in the meeting that they finally resolved their position on it. And first, a motion was put up to approve the ordinance as presented by staff with all those features in it. And it was unanimously denied, with some planning board members feeling it had gotten too strict and some feeling it wasn't strict enough. So a second motion was made to completely prohibit accessory dwellings, and that failed by a 2-to-6 vote. And then finally a motion was made to just simply use the existing ordinance as it is in the UDO, but take out the kinship requirements, and that passed on a vote of 6-2. So all 3 of those ordinance versions were forwarded to the council for consideration. I think as a practical matter, the committee here has focused on the version that had all the features that were added by staff. So that's where most of the discussion has occurred on that. So I'm going to turn it over to Kirk Erickson to go over how things have progressed in the committee.
I'm up to speed now.
It's going to be there will be a quiz.
That's right.
All right. Good afternoon, Chairman Montgomery and committee members. So as Paul mentioned, this has, of course, been at the General Government Committee for several months now. Initially, we brought it to the committee in May of 2016 with all the staff reports and everything for you all to digest from its gestation period in the Planning Board. The committee also continued its discussion at meetings in August and November with several rounds of document preparation by staff in and between those meetings where we answered further questions and helped council guide its discussions on this item. And throughout all of these discussions, it seems to staff that the committee is starting to reach an agreement on many aspects of, as Paul mentioned, the staff proposed ordinance. And the recent discussions have centered on the following 3 or 4 issues. The first being, would there be a minimum lot size to allow accessory units at 9,000 square feet as it's currently in the proposed ordinance, or perhaps under certain circumstances less than 9,000 square feet? Second, what would be the required setbacks for accessory units? Would they be reduced as in the staff proposed ordinance, or would they be the same as principal structures? That was something that the committee spent some time last month in discussing. Third would be whether to consider an opt-in or opt-out provision, which would allow neighborhood feedback for all accessory units, or perhaps to only require this provision for units below a certain lot size. Again, 9,000 square feet in this example, but there's nothing magic about that particular number. And lastly, if the opt-in provision is desired by the committee, what process would be used? For example, special use rezoning would allow an opt-in provision for individual properties, and the neighborhood conservation overlay district, or perhaps a new overlay, could allow opt-in or opt-out on an entire neighborhood scale. So that brings us to where we are now in December. To respond to these items, staff prepared a revised ordinance for the committee to consider that includes 2 new provisions. The first is a provision that would basically have accessory units being allowed on lots under 9,000 square feet through the rezoning to a special use district process. Again, this is an item that would go to council rather than the Board of Adjustment. There would be 2 public hearings, one at the planning board level, one at the council level, just like any other rezoning case. There would be property owner notification within a 500-foot radius, a sign posting, and a legal ad, and council would be able to use a legislative decision-making process on this, so they wouldn't be bound by approving something that met findings of fact. The second thing in the materials that we presented for the committee are accessory units must have the same setbacks as the principal residences. That's generally a rear setback of 25 feet, a side setback of 7 feet on one side, 13 feet on the other, and a combined side setback of 20 feet, unless one of the following conditions are met. And these are situations where staff feels that it may be appropriate to have a reduced setback. 5 conditions. The first would be proposed accessory units adjoin an undeveloped lot. The second being the proposed unit adjoins non-single family zoning. The third being that the proposed unit is less than 14 feet tall, basically a 1-story building. The fourth would be that the proposed unit adjoins a lot which already has an accessory dwelling on it. And the last one of those possible conditions, a 5-foot type 1 buffer yard would be installed between the accessory unit and the property line, screening that unit from view. So if one of those conditions is met, staff is proposing that a rear setback of half the principal setback may be used, and the side setbacks would be unchanged and remain as they are for the principal structure. So I guess the last point staff would make is this ordinance still needs to go before the full council for a public hearing. Obviously that would happen after the committee makes any final discussions and a recommendation to pass on to the full council. So I'll be glad to answer any questions that the committee has at this time or help in the discussion in whatever way you see fit.
Okay, we'll jump right in. I know there were some questions and comments, concerns that have come up since this has gone out. And so, Councilman Bessie?
Yes. Where is the opt-in language, please, that was requested?
The opt-in language is that special use rezoning provision that I referred to. It's under, let's see, subsection 2-6.4 C and subsection 2. So it basically goes on to talk about the dimensional requirements for the accessory dwellings. The last sentence in there says any proposed detached accessory dwelling may be considered through the special use district rezoning process. And there's also some language under subsection, let's see, subsection 10, lot requirements. Accessory dwellings may be permitted on lots smaller than 9,000 square feet through the special use district rezoning process. So that's the real meat of it right there.
All right.
So there was no opt-in provision, as we mentioned on the previous slide, related to an NCO or something along those lines, because when the staff talked about it with the city attorney's office, we felt that the special use district zoning process would achieve the same result, but be much more practicable for both neighborhoods and the council to handle. Because again, if you went through a neighborhood conservation overlay district process as the opt-in provision, you would basically be making it such a high threshold that you would be in effect prohibiting accessory dwelling units in these areas, just because it's so difficult to go through the 55% and then 65% approval for a neighborhood conservation overlay. This would still provide the public hearings and other benefits you get through an NCO, but the only person who would be really having to prove themselves would be the person who was actively trying to get the accessory unit on their property.
It has no effect on lots that meet the 9,000 square foot. So in essence, there is no opt-in requirement for an RS9 area.
That's correct in the scenario that staff put forth in this memo. Again, this is just one of many different scenarios that could happen. If the committee chose that 9,000 square foot number could be raised to a much higher level, that could be applied across the board. There's a variety of different things that could be done, but what staff tried to do with this was find the consensus point between where all the committee's discussion was last month.
I understand. I would respectfully submit that staff did not provide the language request. And whereas I respect staff's good faith view that that was inappropriate because it would be too difficult to meet, it does not meet the committee's request. I have other suggestions, but one of my suggestions today will be to hold this in committee for another meeting with the request that opt-in language would be brought forward for our consideration. We'll then listen to staff's view and make an independent determination as to whether we want to include it or not.
Ms. Adams?
I know some of you saw my emails today. I agree. Again, from the very beginning, former Councilmember Molly Light and others know my passion for tiny houses anyway. And the community is not just a blanket statement of what the community is. Again, like you said, Kurt, years ago in Paul, accessory housing was everywhere in Winston-Salem for dwellings that were very, very old, whether it was for your servants, slaves, family, whatever. That's just the way it was, or you rented it out to somebody. But what I think, again, with the changing dynamics of our world, in the, again, urban core communities, the poorer neighborhoods, again, African Americans, Latino Hispanics, and others, we can't afford as we get older to go to assisted rest homes and things like that. We're going to be depending, hopefully, on somebody taking care of us on the site of our homes or somewhere. Again, that's my feelings about this. I still believe, you know, whatever others want out of this, but I still believe neighborhoods need to be able to opt in or opt out or whatever language that we need. That's the kicker for me.
Mr. Clark?
First off, this is my first meeting of the general government, and I'm trying to get up to speed. I will say my first thought was that we have a solution in search of a problem. We only do about 4 a year. I'd be curious if you could put, and by the way, I agree with Mr. Bessie, I would like to continue it, I think, but I'd like a map of where those 15 were. You have it? Okay, good. Voila. If you could provide maybe, because I think a few are in my ward, if we could provide the addresses of them.
We can prepare that for you for your next packet.
Okay, thank you very much. The other one, we've spent a lot of time, and I will say in the West Ward, because I tend to have, well, we all have some older neighborhoods, but the majority of my ward are older homes, and a lot of them do have detached garage apartments, which I suspect were built at one time for servants. I don't know. I personally don't have one. I do have a garage, but it does have a room above it, but it's attached to the house. We haven't talked much about attached, and where I see a lot of these potential is kind of what you're talking about. I have seen homes that have 2 front doors, and one of them it's a mother-in-law type situation, but they're attached inside. There is a door where you can move from one to the other, but most likely there's a bedroom with a small kitchen or something, and she can use it as she. Most mother-in-laws are, I guess, but where they can live. Does that even come into play here? If I wanted to build a second front door and have another bedroom there, it seems like to me that's a whole different animal.
Basically, this is how it would be handled. There's really 2 scenarios that would be what you might consider kind of an in-law suite or things of that nature. If it's all accessible through your front door, and let's just say you've got a kitchen and a basement and a living room in your basement, that's not considered an attached accessory dwelling unit for the provisions of the ordinance.
Okay.
That's just having a rec room kitchen or something like that. Now, the scenario you're talking about with the separate door, that's where you get into the provisions of this ordinance, where what we call attached accessory dwelling units, and that's approved with a staff zoning
But
permit.
these can be, because 2 doors down I have a resident that has an attached, it has an out door on the side of the house on the front, but you can access it through the house.
Yes, and if it has its own external door, whether or not you can access it inside the house, we would probably call that an attached accessory dwelling unit. Now, it's kind of different if, let's say, the scenario I was talking about where you've got the basement with the kitchen and the bedroom. Let's say you've got a patio on the back and there's French doors that open up to that patio. we probably wouldn't call that a attached accessory unit. But if it was something where it was on the main level of the house, it had a door that faced either the street or the side where the garage is, and that door went in instead of the bedroom to the actual living area or the kitchen area, that would probably be considered an attached accessory unit.
But I can think of two others now that I'm thinking, where they were in garages that were enclosed, and they have their own, not much of a kitchen, but some kitchen, a bathroom. Some of them are more play areas for the kids or whatever, but they do have outside doors. But they could also be a mother-in-law situation. So, I mean, how big does the door have to be before it's attached? Because all of these are easily accessible through the house. It's a hallway. You may not even know you're moving from one part of the house to the other.
Without having our inspection staff here to make that fine line determination, unfortunately, I probably don't have the most satisfactory answer. But what's provided in the ordinance is really meant for more the clear-cut situations where it's within the envelope of the building, but it has a clear wall between the larger portion of the building and the smaller portion of the building. Okay. But we can get some more information on how inspections would make that call and prepare that for you in our next packet.
And I don't know if that needs to be in the ordinance, because I will tell you, in all the cases I can think of, there is no mother-in-law living there. But they could have a kid come back from college, he wants a little bit of his own privacy, so he kind of has the back apartment. Just real quick, a couple other comments. On the ones you go give me the addresses, it would be curious to know if any of those would meet the current requirement. My thought of where you are now is this thing is so restrictive. I think for most practical purposes, you have eliminated what few additions you would have. And I think, and I'll quote Ms. Light in the back, I think she actually mentioned this in her email. If you look at the economic realities, even if you put a little house, what do they call these things, tiny houses on the back of your lot, you still got to run water and sewer to it, electricity, maybe put in another place for the person to park, and I just don't know if economically all that would pay for itself, but that's neither here nor there. But I do think this is quite restrictive if that's our intent, to pretty much eliminate them, because I think you've just got so many requirements. The only thing I would be concerned about, I'm concerned about this opt-in, opt-out. If I want to put something above my garage and meet the requirements, I don't think the whole neighborhood needs to vote on that opting in or opting out. But having said that, there's so few of them. But again, I think I'll know a lot more when I can look at the addresses and I'll actually drive by and see them. But I think, again, what I said at the beginning, this is not a problem. And we certainly seem to be spending an awful lot of time for 2 to 3 houses a year that do it now with and you put all these other requirements on, I don't think you're going to get any. But anyway, thank you.
Mr. McIntosh?
One of the things I want to bring up about this discussion is the fact that one of the big reasons to do anything about this, not just do nothing, is that most times now when somebody wants to do a granny flat or some sort of conversion, they do not get a permit because they just don't. And historically, as a realtor, you walk through houses, you see where this work is done, and we're required to turn people into the city. So inspections really wants there to be guidelines that they can enforce. So people are doing electrical work and plumbing work, on the side, under cover of darkness, and that's one thing that we really want to get rid of. The struggle for me in this whole thing has been that we haven't really come up with a surgical way to do this. We're either going to place the burden on the people who want to do it and have to opt in, or we're placing a burden on the neighborhoods who want to opt out and not have it affect them. It's a really broad thing, and I don't think the 9,000 square foot lot size really differentiates between the neighborhoods that want it and neighborhoods that don't. So I still struggle with it a lot, because I know there are some neighborhoods where it's a genuine assistance to the people who live there. It's an economic benefit to them, and there are other neighborhoods that view it as an intrusion of commercialism. But every time we say no to density, we're saying yes to sprawl, and that has to come into the conversation, because we're discouraging more density in our downtown inner city neighborhoods. We're saying if you want to live in Winston-Salem, you have to go out and tear up green fields and build out there. So I struggle with it.
Councilman Bessie?
Another information request. Looking at the information about other cities. Could council remind us again, when was the case decided in Wilmington that effectively struck down the kinship requirements?
Has been that long.
The materials the attorney's office previously gave us showed that it was in the spring, summer of 2013.
I was gonna say, it was just a couple.
Was
I believe it was either 2009 or 2007. I'll have to look back and get it to you. But
The question that I'd like to have checked on is for the other cities and the majority that permit accessory dwellings with certain restrictions, how many of those contain the, arguably unenforceable provisions regarding kinship? So the same kind of thing that Winston-Salem did. I would suspect that a lot of those communities have similar requirements in their ordinances, and they simply haven't come through the process yet of determining how they want to adjust those in relation to the changed legal environment. I'm guessing here, but I'm guessing that it's the cities that are finding the demand for more urban housing, dealing with these first, and it's the cities like Raleigh and Chapel Hill that are two of the four that just prohibit accessory dwellings without rezoning, it being sort of the leaders in increased demand for urban housing in those areas, and they've already made an adjustment to avoid having in effect an RS9 converted into an RS 4.5 as a matter of right, and that we'll see the pressure ratcheting up as the currently very strong downtown new housing demand continues to spread out to the more urban neighborhoods. And I'm not worried about what's happening now. I'm worried about what will happen over the next few years as that effect takes place. I think that's a good thing, but it's only a good thing as long as we can do it without either gentrifying our urban neighborhoods or making them less attractive and less livable by an uncontrolled, attached or accessory dwelling process. And I think Councilmember McIntosh and Councilmember Clark are right that it hasn't happened yet, but that I'm not comfortable that it won't happen and have some unintended downward pressure on the livability of the neighborhoods where it starts to happen first. I mean, there are edges of the Ardmore neighborhood that have seen that push, and you'll get varying opinions as to whether it's a positive or a negative, but I'm not sure. So anyway, I would like to see that information.
Okay.
To the city attorney, the legislature, how is this, seeing that we already know this is one of the strictest, how do you, I don't know how to word this, but you find out or put a feeler out there as to, could this come back dead on arrival, because it could cause some other things. If this one is one of the strictest, and what we're seeing in the legislature is they are more, inclined to allow citizens, their property, businesses, it's theirs. That's the mindset. They can do what they want, whether it's put a billboard, put a phone tower, doesn't matter. And I'm wondering if you can put some feelers out. How, again, they said it's the strictest, but could this cause us some pain later on? Also, with the request for proposal for a housing consultant looking at housing in Winston-Salem and density and affordable housing, this has to be one of those things, again, that we look at. We can't talk about density if we're not willing to help make density happen in a way that everybody can agree with it, in some form or fashion.
All right. One more, Mr. Clark.
Trying to relate how big 1,000 square feet is, I do have two sons that live in apartments in New York City that were 500 square feet each, and they were quite big enough for one person.
Half my house.
I'd be curious to know if any of the other places have square footage restrictions, and you could certainly go down if there's a concern about, again, folks building two houses. 700, 800 square feet would be more than enough for two people.
Most of the other ordinances do in fact have some sort of square footage restriction, that either expressed as an absolute number or a percentage of total lot area, and they range all over the map.
Okay.
We can certainly provide you with some examples of that at the next
That'd be
meeting.
fine.
Okay. Basically, what I've heard so far is some questions to staff, and without any disagreement, the sentiment to keep this in committee with several questions, and that I've tried to sum up here is one, bringing back something to committee that has the opt-in provision in it and allow the committee to then have a conversation around that, whether or not that's something we'd like to move forward with. The addresses of these locations to be sent to council in packet, as well as the question in reference to the square footage requirements, which was just answered, but just a little bit more detail. Did I miss any other questions we had for staff?
The question about the provisions.
Yep. Okay. And
I
then
also had a question Councilmember Clark brought up. Can any of the current approved units on this map meet the new proposed ordinance? In other words,
Okay.
would it be too strict to knock them out of contention?
Okay.
And we'll bring that as well.
All right. With that,
I'm sorry, I was
Councilmember
late,
Larson.
and I just had a farewell party at Old Salem. So, one question: are we going to require a second address for these auxiliary buildings?
Yes, we would.
They would. So there would be a numbered address. So it would be 2 mailboxes.
Correct.
I think the way it was written, you said there would be 1 mailbox in this guidelines as far as appearance for building for attached auxiliary buildings. It's a minor detail, but the point is we're going to establish a separate unit with the U.S. Postal System.
And I misunderstood your question. I thought you were asking for detached units. In that case, we would require a second mailbox.
And what about attached units? Would they also require a second address?
Yes, detached units would require a second address.
Attached.
Oh, I'm sorry. We can get back with you on that, get you some more information, talk to the addressing staff, and make sure. You don't want to misquote it to you one way or the other.
I think the logistics of that would be worth noting, particularly for emergency response and what have you.
Okay. All right. With that, we'll hold this and get those answers to council. All right. Item G4, we have 7 minutes for
2 items.
Public Works.
Item G4, resolution authorizing subordination of financing for Chatham Mill Apartments.
Good afternoon again.
Good afternoon.
In October 2015, the mayor and city council approved a $750,000 loan and housing finance assistance funds for permanent financing toward the redevelopment of the former Chatham Manufacturing Company located at 800 Chatham Road into 166 units of permanent rental housing known as Chatham Mills Apartments. The renovation is complete and the units are occupied. The proposed financing in the original action included a HUD-insured 221D4 first mortgage of $20.9 million and a total project cost of $39.8. When the loan closed in December 2014, the HUD loan amount was for $16.7 because all of the funds were not used, and the total project cost had decreased to approximately $36 million. Now, HUD is increasing the amount of its loan to $17 million, and Chatham Mills Venture will be entering into an amendment of the HUD deed of trust to secure the increased amount of the loan. Chatham Mills is requesting the city to agree to the amendment to the HUD deed of trust and to subordinate the city deed of trust to the HUD deed of trust as amended. There is a 2016 deadline to close on this amended HUD loan. A resolution to agree to the amendment to the deed of trust and to subordinate the city deed of trust as amended is attached. The resolution also authorizes staff to administratively approve requests for subordination up to $20.9 million, which was described in the original council action.
All right.
That's a very quick overview.
Yep. All right. So for what is before us is an action more so specific to we will still be in a subordinated position as previous before, but it changes the dollar amount in which we were subordinated in that process.
That's
All right.
correct. And the other thing it does is to allow staff to administratively sign any subsequent subordination agreements or requests for that.
Up to the 20.
As long as it doesn't exceed the 20.
All right.
I just
Question.
feel that language.
Questions from committee?
Great.
All right.
Second.
Moved for approval, properly second. Any additional questions? One, I just simply give a comment. One is this project, look forward to it, continue moving forward. Councilman Marshall worked hard on it, and one thing she helped them commit to doing in this process was including affordability units in this before we even had an affordable housing ordinance. And so I'm grateful to the developers, and now I'm Councilman McIntosh's ward.
It was in the North Ward to 2010.
All right. So that's been moved properly second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed likewise. All right. That's unanimous. All right. Item G5 on the amended agenda.
Item G5, housing study scope of work suggestions.
Yes, this item is one where staff was requested by Councilmember Montgomery to look at conducting a housing study. So we're in the process of preparing a request for proposals to solicit firms to conduct the study, and the purpose is to assess the city's current housing conditions, identify the housing needs, identify strategies for addressing the needs, and identifying funding sources to leverage local sources. And as we've stated here, there are similar studies that have been conducted elsewhere. However, we're attempting to tailor the study to meet our needs. This study will assist us in focusing our efforts on critical housing areas such as housing affordability, at-risk households, or rental housing problems, and a few other issues. While a draft RFP has been prepared and is attached, which is a very rough draft, staff is seeking direction from the committee regarding other elements that the committee believes should be included in the scope of work. And if you aren't prepared to do that tonight, we would certainly appreciate having a conversation with each of you, or you sending us your suggestions so we can move forward with this as quickly as possible. I'd be glad to try to answer any questions.
Councilman Bessie.
I just had one additional suggestion. You have housing market and housing demand analyses broken out citywide and downtown. I would suggest that you include additional breakouts in GMAs 2 and GMA 3.
Councilman Adams.
I think it's a good idea that, as Mr. Brooks said, that we have an opportunity to send them suggestions, just email like they did with this other consultant for the strategic planning session. Just let us know when it's due, get the CALs involved, tell us, who to send it to.
All right. Councilman Clark.
One question I've had all along when we talk about particularly workforce housing and affordable housing, I ask, what is that number? And I get a number back, and maybe I'm just old. It's been a long time since I've rented an apartment, but I hear sometimes it comes back $700, $800, $900 is considered an affordable or workforce type place. And I would just like if a consultant comes in to test that number for the folks that need housing, what is, quote, the amount they can spend? Again, I know I'm old, but $900 sounds like an awful lot for a, quote, affordable.
I welcome the opportunity to look at this. I mean, housing is big on a lot of our agendas, and I think this is going to allow us to be intentional going forward and setting policy and actually having a policy. Whereas I think now we just tend to be reactive just because we don't have something out there that says what we intend to do. So I think this is great, and I'll have some suggestions.
All right. And likewise, we'll again, that's part of the questions that we've had that come up over time. Is one reason that I reached out to staff and said we need to get something tangible that we can have as a community that answers some of those questions in terms of when we talk about affordability, what is affordability, and we know that from a general financial standpoint, what people should and be spending on housing, and then what does that look like for us? So even in the points of economics, is that more so kind of testing our median income and what that means in housing? Is that what that would address?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Mr. Brooks?
If I could ask and permit me to do so without being too bold, could I request getting that information within the next 2 weeks in order to move this forward as quickly as possible?
All right. We hear
I
that
would
request.
appreciate that.
If you
Okay.
could send us an email request, and that way I can respond back to your email.
All right.
Okay, will do.
And one thing that I said I've asked of staff is in the ability of looking at this housing study is that, as we may know, and the committee and then council is asked to approve in different cycles the housing plan that goes along with how we spend our federal dollars. And one thing that I think would be very important is in terms of us being able to see from this housing study what comes back to us and how we set priorities within that the plan that we do for HUD and the federal dollars that come through, how we can make sure we're aligning those dollars to hit the areas of need that may be identified by this plan. Okay?
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. With that being said, one other thing just to mention from to the committee on the committee side of things before we get ready to adjourn, and that is I've asked staff to look at opportunities for us to deal with the backlog of housing cases, and particularly the demolition ones. And so in having conversation with staff, they're going to be looking at particular breaking up, potentially coming back to council and ask committee and looking at some special meetings. Councilmember Light mentioned it last month, but more specifically breaking it up into 3 categories. One, the properties that are at 65%, which means that they're ready to be demolished. Those that are eligible for in-rim repair, and then those that fall under the category of being able to have eminent domain enacted upon them, and allowing us at 3 different occasions potentially to come in a longer work session to actually deal with those cases so that we can deal with the backlog, and then that staff and council can be caught up and looking at being able to do that over the next 6 months. And so we'll be getting some more information from staff in reference to that, but want to at least let the community know that that's been a conversation. Mr. Bessie?
Public Works will start at 6:10.
All right.
6:10, please.
We're adjourned.
Dan, you're on your own, bud.